Okay, that's the meeting now recording. So I'll now take the sedierant of the Equal Opportunities Forum on Wednesday the 15th of September 2021. I have apologies from Councillor Kalikas and Councillor Devlin, and Councillor Razak is substituting for Councillor Devlin. Councillor Donnelly, I can see that you're present, as is Councillor Halford. Councillor LeBlanc? No. Councillor Lennon? No. I can see that Councillor Loudon is present. Councillor Lowe? No. I have apologies from Councillor McGuigan, and I can see that Councillor Thompson is also present. We also have a number of officers in attendance for today's meeting. Has any other councillor joined during the roll call? Okay, I'll now pass you back to the Chair to commence today's business. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, Elizabeth Ann. Thank you. As I say again, welcome to everyone, and we'll get straight down to the business. Number one, any declaration of interest? No? Okay. I'll just indicate before we go any further that item 6 will be taken after item 3 today. Just a wee bit of note there. I carry on now with minutes of previous meetings. Can I have that moved? It's a correct minute.
I'll move, Chair.
Thanks, Mary. Okay then, we'll move straight on to business then, and it's item number 3 is a gender inequality presentation and why it's important, and I think it's going to be Heather Williams to present this presentation. So Heather, if you would like, after the presentation, if you'd like to stay for the rest of the meeting, if you need to go, carry on there. So whatever you want to do, you're free to do. So carry on, Heather, please.
Thanks, Bert. Thanks for the invite. Just to say, this presentation was originally given to councillors as part of a session around violence against women and girls services within South Lanarkshire council area. And we were asked if we would bring it to the Equal Opportunities Committee, which we were happy to do. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Bear with me while I try and get Teams to work for me. Hopefully. Okay. Hopefully everybody's seen that okay, yeah?
Yeah, we'll see it, Heather.
Fantastic. That's the first hurdle over and done with, Mary. So yeah, we kind of themed our presentation around gender inequality and why it's important. When we talk about violence against women and girls within the Scottish context and within the context of Equally Safe, we very much see violence against women and girls as a cause and consequence of gender inequality. And by that we mean that we recognise that the differences in terms of how women and men live their lives and the societal expectations which are placed on women and men, that cumulates in the vulnerability and the inequality that women experience, and it shows itself within the violence against women that is often perpetrated by men. And I've put a quote up there from Equally Safe, which says that men's violence against women is a function of gender inequality, and it's an abuse of male power and privilege, and that definition highlights the need to understand violence within the context of women and girls' subordinate status in society, and that such violence cannot be understood in isolation from the norms, social structure and gender roles within the community which influence women's vulnerability to violence. And basically what we mean by that is that because of those societal expectations, because of the gender norms that are placed on men and women, often that the idea that men are the breadwinners, that men are strong, that women need protected, that those ideas, that those norms play into that subordination, and that women are seen as weaker, and therefore it increases their vulnerability and the chances of them experience some form of men's violence against women and girls. In terms of why does this matter, and why do we need to recognise that the way that men and women experience the world is different, and recognise that impacts on us, and why is it important for you as counsellors to be aware of that? Ultimately, it's because the decisions that you make in terms of the policies that you pass, in terms of the spending and budgetary decisions that you make, is that they will have different impacts on men and women. And those decisions can further entrench that inequality and further entrench that vulnerability, particularly if we take a gender neutral approach to decision making and to budget and spending decisions. Taking a gender, recognising gender inequality and recognising violence against women and girls as a form of gender-based abuse doesn't mean that we don't recognise that some men will experience violence. Men are more likely to experience violence from other men, but they do also experience violence and abuse from women. But what a gendered analysis means is it allows us to make sense of the scale and the impact of men's violence. It allows us to understand the different experiences and the different ways in which men and women, experience violence and abuse. So, for instance, women are more likely to lose their lives at the hands of someone that they know, so a current or ex-partner, whereas men are more likely to, be murdered by other men in the street. Women are less safe in their own homes, and taking a gender-based approach just allows us to recognise that. So, for instance, if we look at kind of justice statistics, then taking a gendered analysis, for instance, if you look at crime by gender, it shows that more men than women have a charge against them, or are likely to end up in our criminal justice system. But it also shows that men are more likely than women to commit a crime of indecency. And for indecency crimes, men are most often convicted of rape or sexual assault, whereas when we're looking at indecency crimes for women, they're most often convicted in relation to prostitution. So taking a gendered lens to it allows us to see the differences behind the numbers, and the differences in terms of the experiences, if you like. I've put this quote up in terms of, the disparities and inequalities between the sexes have often become embedded to a greater or lesser extent in the baseline of public policies and the allocation of public resources. And that basically doesn't mean that the people within our public services or yourselves as counsellors are sexist or institutionally sexist, or are going out of their way to make things harder for men or women. What it does mean, though, is that our systems and our structures have been developed in such a way that they're often gender blind, and therefore it takes no account of the fact that men and women's lives are very different. So they're very different in terms of in terms of women's economic earning potential, in terms of the jobs that they go into, in terms of the impact on their caring responsibilities, in terms of the fact that women are more likely to experience poverty at all points in their lives. Through not taking a gendered lens and not seeing those differences, often structures and systems develop that go through, basically are based on that default of gender neutral, which often defaults to white men's experiences. So not taking a lens and looking at how do different policies and how do different decisions impact on women generally, but also how do they impact on people with different characteristics, so from people from minority ethnic backgrounds or for people with disabilities, then we often default to that standard, which is often white male experiences. So, for instance, thinking about kind of policies where we see that. So, just mentioned earlier about women experiencing poverty in their lives. If you look at pension policy within the UK, pension contributions, and our pension policy is based on this idea of someone working full time. The reality is that we know is that women tend not to, because of caring responsibilities. In terms of our taxation around pensions and private pensions, again, that default idea of people working full time and having a disposable income to be able to put into private pensions benefits men and doesn't take into account and the different experiences that women often have of employment and the type of employment that women tend to be in. So a gender neutral approach often means that one, there are people who are being who miss out or are not being thought about, and therefore it leads to that inbuilt, if you like, discrimination within our systems and our structures. And that's something that's it's important to take a gendered lens and to look at what will the different impact be. In terms of thinking about kind of violence against women and girls, often it's seen as a kind of justice or a public protection issue. And actually what we need to be taking is a more coordinated, multi-sectoral approach that considers how policy and practice in areas such as early years, education, employment, health, housing and welfare impacts on women's lives, and what decision makers within these areas can do to tackle gender inequality. Often violence against women and girls is seen as something for the police or the courts to deal with, or it's seen as being a kind of quite a niche issue, but actually all areas of public life have a role in tackling the attitudes and tackling the systems and the structures which lead to that inequality, which increase women's vulnerability to experience violence against women and girls. And as I say, that idea often that we take a gender neutral approach, which means that we default to often seeing it through the eyes of white males, means that women's experiences and those of other groups within society aren't always recognised. And ultimately, there are very few things that are gender neutral due to the differences in men and women's lives in terms of the impact that those gender norms and gender stereotypes have on how we live our lives often. Even when we don't subscribe to all of them all of the time, the reality is that within Scotland and within the UK, women have a greater caring burden, and therefore that has an impact on them and how they live their lives. In terms of kind of some of the stats from Scotland, Scottish Government last year published their Equality Index, which brings together a number of statistics around men and women's lives. And I suppose these stats that I've put up on this slide bring home some of the impact that those the differences and the gender norms that have that expectation that women will take on caring roles actually has on women in particular. So you'll see there that in 2018, 85% of people who were in active duty caring were women. That basically only 8% of women in employment were self-employed compared to 16% of men. That in terms of kind of flexible working, it tends to be women who work part-time or have flexible opportunities, less so for men. The one that for me that always stands out that I think actually, we really need to do something about is the modern apprenticeship. So only 761 women completed a STEM modern apprenticeship in 2018-19 compared to over 8,000 men. And what that means is that it comes out in the kind of median hourly earnings that women earn less than men, because traditionally the employment opportunities or the employment routes that women go down tend to pay less And I think we've kind of seen that in the last year and a bit with COVID and the pandemic, and the impact that that's had on the people that we have relied on, and those key workers, and the low pay issues which come from that, and the impact that has. And in terms of why does this matter from a violence against women and girls perspective, is that actually this poverty, these inequalities which are built in and are a result of the gender norms actually mean that women are often more vulnerable, or they have less options or less choices when they're, if they experience a form of violence against women and girls. So women tend to rely more on social housing, and if they become homeless, their options for private lets and things like that are limited because of lower income and in terms of lower earnings and the amount of their income that it takes, and women are more likely, as I say, to be living in poverty at all points of their lives. So this kind of gender inequality has a massive impact on women's and men's kind of their choices and their their options and opportunities. And in terms of taking a gendered analysis, part of it is about it's about looking at the world. It's about taking a gendered lens that takes into account the differences in men and women's lives and how this affects them. And it doesn't just mean looking at women. It means looking at things from the perspective of men and women. It recognises, I say, that a gender neutral approach assumes that everybody is the same, and we know that that's not the case. But what that also means is that if we assume that everybody experiences everything the same, is that there are built-in inequalities and built-in kind of discrimination within the system. And I suppose recently one of the ways that that's been seen is that through the work that's been done in Scotland around kind of homelessness, and the HARSAG group and the rapid response and trying to cut kind of rough sleeping, is that actually that's been a very male-centred approach in terms of male experiences of homelessness. Initially, the work that was done around that actually took no account of women's different experiences of homelessness and that hidden homelessness, the sofa surfing that often happens, or the fact that actually when women are homeless, they often have children as well. There were, obviously that's been highlighted, and there's been work done at both the Scottish Government and at a local level to make sure that those gender differences in terms of how men and women experience homelessness are taken into account. But there is still, I would argue, there are still some work that needs to be done around looking at the different presentations and looking at how that impacts differently on men and women. In terms of for councillors, one of the your duties, or one of the roles that you've got, is that local authorities are required under the public sector equality duty to try to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimisation, to advance equality of opportunity between different groups, and to foster good relations between different groups. And I suppose it's that thing about, well, what does that actually mean? And I suppose I've put this up, that it's not enough to ensure that policy doesn't discriminate against women and girls, but we need to ensure that gender equality is positively advanced through policy and practice. So the policies that you, within your role as councillors and within a local authority are putting forward, it's about being clear about what impact are these going to have. If they're going to have negative impacts, and how do we ameliorate that? Or what do we need to do to make sure that things aren't having a negative impact? So I'll give you an example. One local authority in Scotland was looking recently at increasing the charges for storage of goods when somebody was homeless. And their equality impact assessment said that this would have no different impact on men or women. But actually, when you broke it down, when you looked at the data in terms of who used that service, who was in homeless accommodation that had belongings that needed to be stored, is that it was predominantly more women than men, and actually a large number of them were women who'd experienced domestic abuse. So by looking at the data, we were able to see that actually that policy was going to actually negatively impact on women in particular, but also particularly on women who'd experienced a form of violence against women and girls. And often you see equality impact assessments that say things like that there's no evidence that this will negatively impact on anybody. And I would argue that actually if you've got an equality impact that says that, it's usually because there's no data there to say whether there will be any difference. And actually what we need to be better at doing is collecting the data to be able to actually say that, because in my experience, I would say there's very few policy decisions that we make that actually don't differently impact on women and girls, or on people from ME communities, or from people with disabilities, because of the different way in which they use services and in which they live their lives. And I suppose it's that thing about recognising that decisions, whether it be policy decisions or spending decisions, that they can affect men and women differently. And I suppose part of your role is about interrogating those decisions and ensuring that an analysis has been carried out that is a quality analysis that is based on data. Or if there is no data, that actually we look to see how do we collect data and what does that data tell us. I suppose from my perspective, I would say that one of the things that in terms of the public sector equality duties, and particularly in relation to equality impact assessment, is that they've become a bit of a technocratic process where it's a box ticking. And part of that is because of often a lack of capacity within public bodies, because there's obviously been cuts in services and cuts in roles. And what's one of the first things to go? It's often things that are seen as nice to do, which equality often is. But rather than it being a tick box exercise, it should be about what does the data tell us about the differences in people with different characteristics and how they use services and how they live their lives. And what is it we are trying to do in terms of increasing equality, and starting from there rather than developing a policy or a practice and then equality impact assessing it. I think we've often got it the wrong way about, unfortunately. And I suppose ultimately, gender and gender norms and gender stereotypes impact on all of us in terms of how we see ourselves and our place in the world, and how we navigate our way through life. And unfortunately, those gender stereotypes and gender norms for women mean that we're often more likely, as I say, to experience forms of violence from people that we know, that we're less safe in our homes, but also in terms of the attitudes that we experience when we ask for help, in terms of those responses, and how those gender norms and gender stereotypes can play into that experience. So I suppose, for me, what I would be saying is, equality doesn't equal sameness, that we shouldn't be treating everyone the same, that we need to be clear about the differences in terms of how people live their life, how those intersections in terms of being a woman and being disabled, or being a woman and being from a minority ethnic community, how does that impact on individuals differently? What are their needs, and how are those different, and how do we make adjustments and take that gendered lens to ensure that we are not unwittingly creating further discrimination and entrenching further stereotypes and inequality within our systems and our structures. And that's me. I'm happy to take any questions. Hopefully that was useful.
Very useful. Thanks very much, Heather. Informative and very thought-provoking. So thank you. And I remind you, if you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, you can after you've taken the questions, or if you want to leave, that's up to you, Heather. I had a wee look at some stats myself, Heather, and the grim reading. 85% of domestic violence is against women. 3 in 4 women will be abused in their lifetime, which is unbelievable. And this was one that surprised me, but it shouldn't have. Boys who witness abusive fathers when they're younger will most likely be the same when they become fathers themselves to their children or partner. Women definitely do fall way behind in the pay equality, no doubt about it. So what I would like to just end by saying is we all have a duty to ensure quality, safety and excellence of life is in place for all women, all of the time. Thanks again, and I'd like now, bear with me, to open it up to the forum for some questions. Anybody, any questions there?
Councillor Donnelly, followed by Councillor Razak, Chair.
Thanks very much, Liz-Anne. Councillor Donnelly, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Mary.
Just unmuting, that's me.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Heather. That was very informative. And one of my points would be, can that presentation be shared with people that are here today? Because I think we could use it going forward in the equity, the Equal Opportunities Group and the other groups that we are on. Also, I'm going to address this, Chair, to Kay. In terms of the apprenticeships, Kay, I'm taking on board the point that Heather had made, and the figures are grim reading. Is there anything we can do there to make sure that the apprenticeships that we offer within South Lanarkshire is addressing women to be coming forward? Also, the equality impact, the points that Heather had made. Can we look at our equality's impact and make sure that it's dealing with disabled, blacks and women, all minorities and the protected groups, making sure that we are looking at them in terms of how the equality impact does affect them, because I think that was quite startling in terms of storing stuff. And when you delved a bit deeper, that it was mostly women that were asking for stuff to be stored. So that's quite significant. And I dare say we'll probably be the same within South Lanarkshire. And also, I'm quite sure, tell me if I'm wrong, in terms of the rapid rehousing policy that we have, I think we did introduce a clause in regards to women and domestic abuse, and I shared that with Heather, that policy. So I think we have dealt with that and put that higher up the agenda to make sure that is getting looked at, and our housing department are engaged in that very constructively. And also, it also lets us know the point you made, Chair, in regards to young boys. If they see, they'll emulate that behaviour when they grow older. The importance of the Caledonian Project is something which can address that behaviour and help young boys to change that behaviour and know that that is wrong. So I think that's enough to be going on with.
Thanks very much, Mary, for that contribution there, especially one about the... I was surprised. I think recalling was it 8,000 boys, but there only was it 500 girls came forward. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's concerning. Right, thanks for that, Mary. On to Councillor Razak. Go ahead, Mo.
Thank you. Thanks for the excellent presentation, Heather. That was really informative. That the two questions I've got is I think Mary alluded towards apprenticeships. I know that the carers, there's a mentoring program started. I was speaking to Jill Batty about this, and there's a mentoring program that's been started for carers, which I was speaking about in concerns to the disabled, to see if there's some form of a mentoring program can be, that could be started for something similar with people with disabilities. So my question would be then, is that would some mentoring program not be started for females to try and get the numbers up, or the apprenticeship side of it? And the second part would be, is that are we reaching out to the schools, the secondary schools, about apprenticeships and try and see if we can get the numbers increased for the female side of it? And my second question is about health and social care. And you mentioned that 27% are female and 18% are male. Could that be down to the fact that it's seen kind of gender-wise or historically that more women were interested in the job to work around their household duties more than anything else in the previous times, but now maybe it needs to be some education in schools about health and so working in the health place. Sorry, I'm rambling on a bit here because my notes are terrible when I was doing the notes. I was talking about health and social care, and that's my two questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Would anybody like to come back? Any comments for Councillor Razak there? Okay, there. I think they're good points, more about encouraging people, especially health and social care. I know my concern with that was actually, I know there's a lot of elderly people still working, and we're going to be losing them as soon as age and they retire. And it'd be great to see more females and more males, indeed, young people get involved in that. And I know the council have got some ideas and policies to do that. I'm sure they have. Any other hands up there?
Chair, I think Kay and Heather both wanted to come back on Councillor Razak's point, and then we have Councillor Loudon after that.
Right, so is it Kay first and then Councillor Loudon? On you go, Kay.
Thank you, Chair. I've just been scribbling down these questions as folk have been rattling through those. I think Councillor Donnelly, you gave me a challenge there because you had about 3 questions and the one question there. So forgive me if I don't get them all, and you can come back and kind of maybe just touch on a few of those. And I'm very aware, Councillor Loudon, you probably want to come in on the education points. So I'll not dwell on that too much, but I'll maybe start off with the modern apprentices first of all, which, as folk will know, we do encourage via our schools folk to apply for the modern apprenticeships that are there. We've also now got the foundation apprenticeships there, which will lead on into potentially into a modern apprenticeship and other routes for folk as well. And it'll come as absolutely no surprise to the folk in the meeting that, of course, we try and encourage young girls to participate more in STEM subjects. That's been I think a hard bit over the years to turn around. But like many of the things that we've talked about round about that presentation that Heather's given there, some of these are deep societal issues that we are still trying to overcome, and absolutely kind of schools is a good place to make a start on that. Councillor Razak, you mentioned the Carers Modern Apprenticeship, which is a programme that we're about to. It's more about care experienced young people coming into a modern apprenticeship and being supported through that. And of course, there'll be things to pick up in that will help us with other groups who may be disadvantaged through the process. But I think it's probably an interesting observation when you think about the attractiveness of particular careers for young women and young men, that sometimes you can have things that look very equal. So, for example, elected members will remember a couple of years back now, we increased our number of modern apprentices, both in social care and in early years, both with exactly the same terms and conditions of employment. The early years was a very popular career with young people of both genders, and whereas the social care modern apprenticeship was not attractive for young people, and we ended up having to go back out and try and get engage with an older age group there, which is probably, you'll have seen a lot in the news recently about the shortages that there are in social care across Scotland. In fact, that's a meeting that I've got later on this afternoon. But there is something unattractive as a career that we need to get over. Now, some of that will be about terms and conditions, but it's not just about terms and conditions either. It's about things that are much more deep than that. I think, Heather, you touched on the flexibility element of it, and women working flexibly and still having that caring role in society, whether it's for young children or elderly parents or anyone else within their family grouping. and there is still an awful lot of that kicking about, which does make it very difficult to achieve that gender equality if there's an expectation in society for one way or the other. So I'll leave modern apprentices there and move on maybe to the equality impact assessment. So,
Kay, sorry to interrupt you. Could you ask if you just make it brief? Unfortunately, the next item, there are two colleagues who have got to leave 3 o'clock. So just make it brief. So trying to get Heather and Katie in. Okay, thank you.
No worries. Right, this will be the rapid version then. So in terms of equality impact assessment, we do, of course, look at all the protected characteristics, but we're currently doing a review of that right as we speak. So very much about a conversation and getting deep into the information that we have within that. And I'll probably then at that point leave it there because I know others want to talk. Thanks
very much, Kate. I've got Heather and Katie. I'm not being rude. If you make it quite quick, please. So we've got a couple of people who want to get in before we go away. So I think Heather and then Katie. Go ahead, Heather.
No problems. I suppose just in reply to kind of Mo's question about why are these issues, and it does go back to those gender norms and that idea that women are caring and are nurturers, and therefore they tend to get pushed, and I mean pushed by societal expectations into those kind of caring roles. And there is definitely work that's being done within kind of schools. So Zero Tolerance and the Care Inspectorate have been doing some work around early years settings and trying to tackle some of those ideas and making sure that we're not going down the route of within our kind of nurseries of having princess parties and superheroes for the boys and things like that, and trying to tackle some of those more deep-seated. But ultimately, I would imagine that South Lanarkshire have got the same issue in relation to modern apprenticeships and employability as there are in the rest of Scotland, which is that it's very gendered, and that STEM subjects aren't something that are attractive to girls. And it's not because girls don't do maths or they don't do science or anything like that. There's something fundamentally within our systems that are putting people, girls off going down these routes. And I think that's something that we need to kind of look at on a wider basis. What is it about our education system? What is it about those hidden messages that put girls off going down that route? And similarly for boys in terms of caring professions, in terms of early years and in terms of caring roles, because I've yet to find a man yet that doesn't have the ability to care despite what society tells them. So there's something fundamental there that needs to be addressed.
Right, thank you. I've got Katie next and then Eric, and then we'll move on. If anybody hasn't got apologies, but if you need a question asked, if you email maybe Elizabeth Ann and we'll get an answer for you. So we move on to Katie and then Eric. Go ahead, Katie.
Thanks very much, Bert. I will keep this very brief. I just want to thank you very much to Heather for the presentation. I think we are in a really interesting position just now. I think certainly in early years and social care, we've got far more opportunities for people opening up. I think it does start to pose more interesting questions for the council about where gender starts to come into that. And as Heather said, that it's a huge societal issue and it happens very, very early. I mean, the princess parties that started with my own kids long before and they went to school, and the superhero parties and so on. And that's really hard work as a parent. Things are very, very different from when I was at school. We have made huge progress. 30 years ago, I started secondary school and we still I was being told things, choosing subjects. Essentially, I wasn't allowed to do that. Or why don't you just do this? It's just the same as computing. Why do you want to do a couple of sciences and so on? And the work that's been done since then in our schools to promote STEM in particular among young girls is just something that we didn't see before and we haven't seen before. So hopefully that'll bear fruit. I did want to just re-emphasise some of Kay's points about some of the fantastic work that does go on in our local authority, and we should be really proud of it. All of the work that the My Brighter Future team do to promote employability, work-based learning, qualifications for young people in senior phase is all so important. And the fact that we have really, really targeted one-to-one support as well through the Aspire team, which is absolutely, this is one young person that requires some very individualised support, and that's so important. So it will be interesting to see how that continues to develop as more opportunities keep opening up. Thanks, Bert.
Thanks very much, Katie. Can we move on? Eric, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I'll just be quick. One thing you've got to bear in mind here is that although it sounds very negative and sad that we're in a situation where you've less women going into perhaps modern apprentices, but you've also got to remember the flip side to that. Women are doing better at school, women are doing better at university, and women now dominate almost all the professions, certainly below the age of 40. For example, I mean, solicitors, there are now almost 1.5 female solicitors for every male solicitor. And that ratio is swinging widely. Tax advisors are now perhaps a niche thing, more than twice as many women as tax advisors. And if you look at any of the professions these days, they're almost all dominated up to the age of 40 by women. Of course, it swings the other way, mainly due to child caring that is an issue. There's still a big issue. But one of the things you've got to bear in mind is women are doing really well when they're young. Men ought to watch out, because one day they're going to look around and it's going to be, you could see the opposite position here. I suspect that might be a while off, but certainly the gender pay gap under 30 favours women. Gender pay up to 40 is closing very, very rapidly. Went from 24% to 80% in the last 10 years, which is it's still not there, but it's closing so fast. It's very, very good to see. So there are good things that are happening, though it would be wrong to be complacent about where we are. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Eric. Yes, of course, they're actually quite encouraging what you're saying there. But I think we can agree there is a long way to go. Hopefully we're making progress. But it's very important today, I think, to have Heather along and just to enlighten us. So thanks very much, Heather. And I say you're welcome to stay or go away. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert.
Thank you. We'll move swiftly on because I know people have to leave. Item number 6 now we're going to take. It's the accessibility report, and it's Joanne Forbes and Andrew Craigan. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate your acceleration of this report for me. The purpose of this report is to advise the Forum of some changes in the Council's approach to the collection of property information about accessibility. We've recognised that the traditional performance indicators that were generated under our asset management policies are very useful for benchmarking with other authorities, but they're not particularly helpful for our customers or visitors or users of the buildings. So we have created a new survey, and we've given you a couple of examples on the appendices to the report, so that when we are out doing our cyclic surveys of all our buildings, we're now collecting more detailed information that covers the experience from when you arrive at the building and right through the use of the property, not just looking, does it have a disabled toilet? And then what the next phase of that is for us to develop a summary of that. And again, we've given you a couple of examples there that can be shared with users and visitors to the building to give them a more informed position about what is and isn't available at any particular property. And we're going to start our discussions with particularly the likes of South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture Trust about how we can make that information more publicly available. It's at a pilot stage at the moment, but what we're hopeful about is that this will increase an understanding for users about the various properties we have, and also therefore make the dialogue with users about anything that requires to be done to a property more meaningful.
Thank you. I don't know if you'd like to come in at all, Andrew. You want to say anything or comment on that?
No, it's a very short summary in terms of how we're trying to improve the user information that's available for people using the facilities of the council.
Okay, thanks very much. I've got a couple of comments. I'll make them quick and let the forum in. I know you've got to go away. To me, it's apparent that some progress is being made, but it's clear there's a long, long way to go. It's got to take money and obligation, and a task force. I would recommend some sort of task force to go out and report back what exactly is delivered and keep it ongoing. I know it's all about inclusion, not exclusion. And I think most people agree it's not a political thing. This is for us all, political parties working together in unison to deliver a good quality of life for people with disabilities. So thanks for that quick report there, and I'll quickly ask any members of the forum if they'd like to come in with any questions. MD, have any questions?
Councillor Holford, Chair.
Right, Councillor Holford, go ahead, Eric.
I notice you've got in diagram 11 lift dimensions for each one, and those lift dimensions would make a lot of sense. They would work for me. Has this been applied to the lifts in the head office building yet?
No, we have some difficulties with the likes of HQ, which is a listed building. And in making alterations to a listed building, there's a whole load of other things we have to take into account. But we've only really done 6 to 10 properties so far, but we're now starting to roll this out. The council has, or the property team have a cyclic survey, which means we will visit every building within a 4-year period. So a quarter of the estate is visited every year, and we will be picking up all of the buildings during that time.
Okay, because the lifts in the committee room end of the building don't meet those dimensions by a long way.
No, they don't.
Hence, I can't use them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Eric. Are you okay at that, Eric? You want to add anything in there? You okay?
No, that'll do. We could be here for a long time, me picking points.
Oh, I believe so, Eric. It's something I think Eric, we will have to come back to this. I certainly agree with you. Hopefully, if I'm fortunate enough to be back next year, we will certainly address this again. I think Mary's wanting to go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, it's following on from Eric. And I take on board the point Joanne's making about head office being a listed building. But, you know, I'm going to push the boat out here. It doesn't cut it for me. Because we have to make arrangements for councillors coming forward that do have disabilities, and the buildings need to suit their needs. So, Joanne, what I'm going to ask is, I'm not one to be rude, but can we investigate how we get round the listed building scenario? Or do we need to, for elected members, do we need to go somewhere else? Because we should be meeting the needs of all councillors with disabilities. And right now, we're not doing that.
Sorry, Mary, I agree with you 100% there. You make a valid point, and I'd like maybe to give a chance to reply there to Joanne before we go. Yeah. Unless you want to add anything on there, Mary, anything else to say?
No, I think getting Eric's input as well into things. I mean, I had a situation in Hill House where I had a community centre that was not suitable for disabled people, for older people. Now, that managed to break down I managed to break down the barriers and get a ramp and get the facilities sorted. But that took me 6 months to get that on stream. Now, that should never have been the case. And to just be told it's a listed building, we can't do anything about it, then we need to look behind that and we need to investigate. What do we do then if that is the case?
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying, Mary. Sorry, on you go, Joanne.
Yeah. Because it's a listed building doesn't mean we can't find a solution. It just means it's much more complicated to find a solution than it would be in another property, Councillor Donnelly. And you're correct in highlighting as well that sometimes the solution is to provide the function somewhere else in the building rather than to try and adapt the additional space. So we are actually looking at the members' accommodation at the moment.
Thank you. Anybody else like to come in on this subject before we move on?
We have Councillor Razak and Councillor Holford's hand still up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Eric. Is that a legacy hand, or do you want to come back in?
Well, I think Mo was in before me, but it's not a legacy hand now.
Okay, right. Let you go.
Okay, thank you.
Back to you in a minute, Eric.
Yes, following on from what Mary has been saying, for me, I totally agree with Mary. This isn't just the current term, it's the previous terms as well that this has been a problem. It's just been a problem overall. And Joanne, I'm not pointing the blame at you because it's been one of those hereditary things that's been going on and on and on. So the thing I would say is that the disabled access to the main building is concerning because it's our headquarters, and we've got people from with various disabilities coming in, and I think it is a bit of a source of embarrassment. But if you're having someone that has disabilities coming to a meeting or whatever, and then we're struggling to meet their demands to get in and out, and I think this has been highlighted several times, and I'm hoping that that would get looked at a lot sooner because it's our headquarters, and that we would have a larger proportion of people coming through to the main building. Well, unfortunately, the last 18 months, it wouldn't have been the case because of with the COVID and everything else. But I'm hoping afterwards, when everything opens back up, that we have that facility. I'm talking about the main meeting room, for instance. I don't even know if anybody in a wheelchair can go up to the gallery, for instance, to view the meeting, and I'm pretty sure that's not the case. So we are really in a sad predicament where this has been spoken about for a number of years now, and I think it'd be great now that you start addressing this. So I'm not having a pop at you because you start addressing this. I'm hoping that you would have a look at the headquarters first, please.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's a valid point. I know that any new buildings get legislation to meet. Elderly buildings, older buildings, unfortunately, have no one looking after them, or no one pulling them up or asking to improve. There are no checks here. That's something maybe for another, maybe the government, I don't know. But what I could say is we can write and ask about the disability access at the main building and indeed other council facilities if we can get some programme to look at them and implement any works that need done. So thanks for that, Mo. Eric, back to yourself.
Just quickly, I get really frustrated with this idea that you hear a listed building. I hear it all the time. We can't do this because it's a listed building. If it was a health and safety issue, if the building was in risk of going on fire or was inherently dangerous, then that would trump listed building status every time. Disability should do the same. It's got to be this. It's got to be the same level of priority. And I know there's no point in having to go at you, Joanne. You didn't draw up the rules, and I don't. So I'm not having to go. But in terms of what needs to be done, if changes need to be made, they need to be made, and that must. I mean, I love our building. I think it's a really beautiful building. Others may disagree. I really like it, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be adapted to suit the needs of the people who both work in it and who you would like to work in it. At the moment, there's one place in the council chamber for somebody in a wheelchair. Who knows if we have two, what we're going to do, particularly if they're of different parties. So that's enough. I don't need to say anymore.
Thanks very much there, Eric. That's a valid point. We'll treat one part of the community one way and another part another way. The good thing about today, this has been raised. It's the public can see it if they wish, and we've got this on record now, and we will, after this, it'll not just be a discussion, it'll be a case now of moving on and asking for things to be looked at, things to be implemented, and things to move on. So thanks, Eric. I think we've got Katie. Katie, you want to come in there?
Thanks very much, Bert. Yeah, I mean, I agree broadly with everything that previous speakers have said. It is important that our public buildings are accessible, and where there is an issue with a listed building, then we need to look for ways working around that. Relatedly then, I just wondered, so we've got in the next steps of this report that's part of a 4-year rolling programme, and I just wondered if there was any sort of prioritisation in that, because some buildings might be accessed by a greater number of people than other council buildings. Some might be used by communities more. We're talking about hypothetical councillors that might be in the next term or the term after that. And I'm not disagreeing for a second. That's absolutely crucially important that any councillor would be supported to be able to come in and work in the building. But in terms of how are we prioritising maybe accessibility for members of our communities who need to access a leisure centre just now or a community centre just now? Are we thinking about the order in which this rolling programme is happening?
Thanks, you, Katie. I think it's clear. I'm going to have to let our colleagues go, but what I would say is get them back at a later date. And indeed, I think we should take this up. It's a very current subject and something that you say affects us as councillors as well, and colleagues and future colleagues. So very important, yes. So if there are no more questions just now, I'd like to thank Joanne and yourself, Andrew, for coming along. I know you've got to run away. It's a bit unfortunate. We could, as Eric probably agrees, spoke about this for a very, very long time. So thanks for your contribution and coming along today.
Chair, could I then have my hand up?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
No,
so did I, Chair. So did I.
Geez,
so it's just a correction.
Come in.
Sorry, it's just a very quick correction that it's not just about hypothetical councillors. It's about visitors that have disabilities that are coming into the council as well, and they're not hypothetical. That was my point. I'm sorry if I didn't mention that properly.
No, that's fine. We'll understand what you're saying there. It's a valid point. Thank you, Mary. If you don't mind, if you want to come in quickly before our guests leave.
Just quickly, that I think I don't want anybody who's disabled to be the lone voice pushing these things. I think we all need to be the voice pushing these things and getting it right for everybody. And as Katie said, for future people who are coming in, either using the building, as Mo said, or future councillors coming forward that have disabilities. We need to be making accessibility for all. It's in the legislation. We need to do it. So it's a matter of urgency.
Thanks, Mary. You're right. It's about inclusion, not exclusion. It's always about that. It should be. I think we've got another couple of people there just quickly. I think Katie and then Joanne. Katie, go ahead there.
Thanks very much. Bert, just to come back in that, Mo, you're absolutely right. And just to be clear, what I was trying to do there and did it in a clumsy fashion is we need to, it's almost, there's two strands going on here. And it's about, I know councils aren't employees, but, you know, in a lot of senses we are. This is the council building is our place of work. So that almost needs to be looked at in two separate ways. When we've got a council building like the actual chambers, then there's parts of that which are normally publicly accessible, and then parts of it which are private and for councillors. And that's something else that's not actually mentioned in the report. And it'd be the same for other facilities as well, where you've got parts of it which are public facing, like in a leisure centre, for example, and then you've got parts of it which are behind the scenes and are for staff, like staff rooms and so on. So that's maybe something else I would like to sort of bring to future discussion about this as well, because those are two separate issues. And in some senses they need to be considered together, and in other senses it's maybe something we need to think of separately. That was all. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Great contribution again. I think you're right, and with the sounds that I think there's a lot more discussion needed here, and we definitely have to bring this back to the forum, and hopefully we can do that in the near future. Right, I'll move on to Joanne. If you'd like to say something there, on you go.
Yep, thank you, Chair. It was really just to assure Councillor Loudon that the report that we do, what we've tried to do as an efficiency is pull all of our different types of surveys into one, so that we don't have people going back and forward to buildings repeatedly. But that does not mean that we would have to wait. So if there was any particular property or any particular demand or a service requirement, we would absolutely go and do an inspection as a kind of one-off out with the programme, so that this is not just being driven by a bureaucratic programme. That programme is there to try and catch every property at some point. But if there's a particular property comes forward as a priority, it will be picked up.
Thanks very much, Joanne. Thanks again for yourself for coming along today, and indeed for Andrew. I think by the passion I can hear there, the valid questions and concerns, I think it's definitely something we're going to have to come back to. But thanks for this so far. It's good to see it out in the open, and to know we've got concerned councillors who want to see inclusion. That's very clear from all parties there. So thanks very much, Forum, and thanks very much, guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, I think, okay, we'll move on now to, I think we're on now to item 4, it's annual report on mainstream equality and diversity, community enterprise resources here. And could I invite Alistair McKinnon to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to provide an update on the work undertaken and planned by Community and Enterprise Resources to meet the commitments within the mainstream equality reports. Section 3 of the report provides some background and timescales for achieving outcomes to identify improvements in the people's life's chances. Of the outcomes identified, Community and Enterprise Resources will lead on the equality outcome number 2, and this will be progressed by Environmental Services, Consumer and Trading Standards, and details are provided in Appendix 1. Lisa Hughes will provide an update under this area under the next agenda item. Community and Enterprise Resources continues to build and progress and remains committed to embedding equalities across all aspects of our services. Resource equality activity is aligned and reported against 7 Council Plan community objectives, and progressive activity along with the differences each of these have made is detailed in Appendix 2. As you'll appreciate, COVID has an impact on some of the delivery of some of these services, and where applicable, this has been detailed in the appendix. You'll also see from the appendix that the resource undertakes a significant range of actions. There's over 30 of them to support mainstreaming equalities within all our services, and all the services contribute in some way. Just some of the highlight of the main areas specifically under my service. You'll see in item 3, we continue to provide a curbside assistant pull-out service. And we also promote this through the Seniors Together Forum to make sure the availability of this is known as widely as possible. Under item 6, we highlight the work that we have done in relation to play area refurbishments, and as part of the design we look to continue to ensure that we add to the inclusive items of equipment that are included in and increase the accessibility of these play areas. The resources has an in-house equality working group which includes officers from each of the services. It is the responsibility of these service reps to promote and coordinate equality and diversity activities across all the services. And the resource chair of a group is also involved in the corporate equality and diversity working group. Section 4 outlines the equality impact assessments undertaken, and Section 5 outlines the employment and training activities during 2020-21. The resource continues to work closely with a range of equality groups, and these are listed in Section 7. Section 8 of the report outlines the focus for 21-22, and this builds on all the work we have done to date. There are no employer financial implications arising for the report. I would refer you back to Section 2 of the report and ask the forum to note the content, and I'm happy, given the range of services that are listed in the appendix, to try and answer any questions as best as I can if any members have any. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Alistair, for that report. I read through it, quite a lengthy report and comprehensive. The big responsibility, but it's good to see a couple of things stuck out for me there. The play equipment in parks, maybe a piece of equipment for kids with a disability, etc. It's always been a big ask of mine. It's good to see that it's been considered and implemented in some areas. I know as well that COVID's affected, but the response with the resource was encouraging to know you were looking after the vulnerable people suffering from COVID, and you were very well aware of this, and you did make efforts to do things. The improvement of walkways looks good as well, land services, because we all know the value of being out there in fresh air, clearing your head, thinking, improving your general health. So that's a great thing as well. I'd just like to say, everything in the report to me looks positive. Of course, everything else, there'll be money and time involved, so let's hope that gets delivered. I'll not take any more time. I'll ask my colleagues, because I don't like to take all the time. Any colleagues like to comment or any observations there?
We have Councillor Donnelly, Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mary.
I'm not going to reiterate the points you made. Chair is absolutely very potent, but also the support for vulnerable groups and adults. The True Call, I think that's an excellent system that you're trying to put in place, Alistair, even if it is for 6 months, and then people, if they felt it was beneficial, then they can purchase it going forward. And would that be made available then, that system, to private tenants, private residents to purchase? I mean, obviously not let it be free for 6 months, but that would be something I think would be taken up widespread, because there is a danger out there, and if you are alone in your house, there is scams going about, as we all know about. So the safer they feel that they are in their own home, that to me would be the better for them going forward.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Anybody else like to come in with any questions there?
There's no further hands, Chair.
Right, I think, Alistair, you've got an easy right today. They don't need to get you back in. No, thanks. I know the forum will have read the report and they'll have seen the detail in it, and it's encouraging to know. It's very important, and as I say, especially the vulnerable and the COVID thing we've been through for all resources. I know it's not been easy. So thanks very much for that, Alistair, and take care. I appreciate you coming along today.
Thanks, Chair. I'll pass on your kind words to other services. It's much appreciated. As you say, it's been a challenging time with COVID, and the services have hopefully stepped up as required. So thank you for that.
Right, thank you, Alistair. Thank you. I'll quickly move on to item 5, scams, the prevention project. I think I'm going to invite Lisa Hughes to present this. Go ahead there, please.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully. Should work. Oh, sorry, actually. Sorry, it's just trying to load up now. However, sorry, that's the wrong presentation. Just be 2 seconds, sorry. I'll just say while I'm doing this as well, Cross Hill train station is right behind my flat, and you may hear trains go by because I don't have my earphones because my mum's dog chewed them, so bear with me. Sorry about this. I don't understand why this isn't
take your time.
Showing up.
Chair, this is almost as good as that dog ate my homework.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologise for this. I don't know why it's not showing me the normal screen when I'm trying to share. I'll just try again. 2 seconds, sorry.
There we go.
Oh, this should be us now. Right, okay, sorry about that. Just change it to slideshow. Oh, so this is not right. Okay, so this is my presentation, but I'm not controlling this. Is someone else controlling this at the moment?
No.
Yeah, I've opened it up for you, Lisa. So if you want to let me know when you want to change slide, I'll change the slide for you, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So apologies, first of all, but when people think of trading standards, what they generally think of first is, dodgy workmen and unsafe products, and that's obviously a big part of what we do, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we do around scam prevention. So next slide. So I'm part of the communities and business team, and through the Scam Prevention Project, we have taken on a role that's more akin to adult protection, so protecting the most kind of vulnerable people in the community. Next slide. So our aim is to reduce financial harm for vulnerable people on the doorstep by phone, mail or online. As we know, scams come in many different forms. We're looking to support people to live independently in their homes for longer, and that's with a kind of long-term aim to reduce public expenditure over time. What we have found is that once people are scammed, it's a quicker, it's not long before they end up in kind of like assisted living and things like that. So next slide, sorry. So the way that we go about this is by using a package of preventative measures. So things like no cold calling stickers for the front door, call blockers, and video doorbells. So we were just talking about the true call units there, and they're a very effective way to prevent nuisance calls. So you can add numbers to a star list, and that's for people that you know, so they can get straight through. you can actively block numbers that you don't want to get through at all. Unknown callers are told what type of calls are not wanted. So people are required to identify themselves before the call will actually go through. So what we find is telemarketers hang up straight away, because usually that's one of the types of calls that you say you don't want. Silent calls and recorded calls can't get through. And the Truecall unit always lets the recipient know who's calling. And a lot of these scam calls are recorded messages, so they just can't get through at all. We also have the Friends Against Scams project, which is a national trading standards scheme. So they have a website which is full of lots of different resources. There's a short online test that you can take that kind of tests your knowledge of scams, but there's also lots of tips to help protect you and your family from scams. Part of that is the Scam Marshal scheme. So that's when we send out an envelope to people who have been scammed, usually scam mail, things like that, or anyone that receives scam mail, and we ask them to gather it up and put it in the envelope and send it back to us. And that allows us to kind of track how people are being targeted, and also trends as well. So how are the scams evolving? What are they? How are they trying to get at people? We also, within South Lanarkshire itself, we have the Scam Alert Network. So it's just an email system. So people sign up with their email address. And if we have any information on scams that are happening nationally or locally, we'll send the information out by email. We don't bombard people with information. It's very kind of targeted. The other thing we do is we promote our Buy with Confidence scheme. So in order to give local citizens an alternative to potentially fraudulent tradesmen, we run the Buy with Confidence approved trader scheme. So applicants have their trading history and practices, their basic financials and their insurances audited, as well as having to supply basic criminal disclosure checks for all their staff that are working in and around consumers' homes. So we always encourage people to use a trader from that scheme rather than trying to find one online themselves. We also use our social media platforms. Facebook, we have our own Facebook page, and it's really successful. A lot of people follow us, a lot of people share our posts. We also use Twitter, but it's actually the council's Twitter account, but they put things out for us, and they're really good about doing that as well, the digital department. Next slide, please. So what we did was we've created relevant links between relevant departments, so social work, telehealth, telecare, things like that. So I went out and trained carers in what to look out for when they're in people's homes in terms of, are they being targeted for scams? So we're trying to encourage a more holistic approach. It makes sense that if you're a carer in someone's home, that you try and solve as many problems as you can while you're there, if you can. And we understand that carers are busy, of course. So we've asked carers to look out for things like unpaid bills piling up, or just like a notepad next to the telephone, maybe with bank details written on it, things like that. These are kind of giveaways. Scam mail, competition letters, anything that would kind of indicate someone's being targeted. And we ask that they then contact us and connect us to the people that they're concerned about. So it's one telephone number, one email address, a really clear line of communication, and the carer can choose email or telephone, whichever way they want to get in touch with us. Next slide, please. So this is just some of our referral partners. I'm sure you recognise all these organisations. Care and Repair are always a really handy partner for us. Seniors Together as well, they're a really great partner. We attend their meetings and they arrange talks, community talks and things for us to go out to. And they also regularly share our social media posts. And obviously their members are really our target audience for this kind of information as well, although they do tend to be a bit more savvy, the people that are involved with Seniors Together. We also use the Neighbourhood Watch Scotland alert system. We use it just because it's so kind of visible. There's lots of people that are signed up to it. And the good thing about it is you can actually target a postcode area. So if something is happening, if there's a rogue trader going around a specific area, we can get the information out really quickly to that neighbourhood. We also partner with Police Scotland. We do a lot of kind of scam prevention talks and events with them. Get to supermarkets, community engagement and things like that. They're so recognisable, police, and everybody wants to talk to them, so that they're kind of a good hook in for us. We also, the banks as well, with the banking protocol, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. Next slide, please. So this is just some stats to kind of outline the devastation that scams can cause. So the estimated annual cost to the UK of scams is 52 billion, with the average scam victim losing £1,000. So it's a huge amount of money for one person to lose out on. Only 5% of scams are actually reported, which, you know, is a really tiny number. People feel ashamed that they've been scammed, so they don't want to admit to it. And you've seen it yourself. You're watching TV, you know, the kind of morning magazine programmes where they have a scam victim on, and the way they're being questioned, it's very much, the undertone is very much, how could you let this happen? But these scams are so sophisticated, and usually they prey on vulnerable people as well. The other thing is that even though you tell someone they're being scammed, they often don't want to believe you, because the scammer is their friend. It's the only person they've got to communicate with. Loneliness is a huge problem, as you know. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk you through a typical case that we dealt with. We've changed the name of the victim to Bill. Bill had been sold a boiler that he didn't need, and in all likelihood his vulnerability was taken advantage of. So next slide. So the company turned up at Bill's uninvited. They wanted £3,000 up front for a new boiler, and they also sold him a service contract for an extra £1,500. Bill didn't have the money in the house, because who does? So the trader drove Bill to the bank to lift the cash, and this is how we ended up getting connected to Bill. So the bank used the banking protocol. So the banking protocol is when bank staff suspect that one of their customers is being scammed. Often scammers take their victim to the bank to withdraw cash. That goes for rogue traders, you know, everyone. And that's exactly what happened to Bill. So the bank was suspicious because he was withdrawing a large amount of cash, and he hadn't been in the bank for years. So they called the police, who then contacted us. So next slide. So we sent 2 officers to the bank, and they spoke to the trader, and they explained that Bill had a statutory right to cancel the agreement. So if you contract for work in your home, over the phone or online, you always have that 14-day cooling off period. So that was explained to the trader. The officers then took Bill home and quickly suspected that he has probably been the victim of more than one scam. And if not, in all likelihood, he was going to be targeted again. So next slide. So he had very little support. There were bank details written down on a pad next to his phone. And he mentioned phone calls, but he couldn't recall detail. The bank had noticed that he was paying multiple insurances for the same thing. And he also had accounts with other banks, so we asked them to investigate his accounts as well. And they showed up with, you know, the same information. He's paying multiple direct debits for the same things. So they worked with the banks worked with Bill to figure that out. Next slide. So we fitted a call blocker and a video doorbell for Bill. One of our officers monitors the doorbell because Bill doesn't have any family close by. The bank's working with him to figure out what else could be cancelled, and we connected Bill to our colleagues in social work to determine what more assistance Bill needs. Next slide, please. So Bill is now protected from unwanted callers on the doorstep and on the phone. The bank helped out with his accounts, and we, you know, being connected to social work will hopefully allow him to live independently in his home for longer. And next slide. So that was just a quick overview of the SCAMS project, and this is the details for any referrals. If you ever have any, we'll take referrals from anyone if you want to note the details down. And does anyone have any questions?
Thanks very much there, Lisa. That report there, I've been a victim of scamming, so I'm well aware of it. And I know other people, we all probably know somebody that has been. And of course, I don't know how many people get the phone one. You've been involved in a car accident, what have you. Scams are disgraceful. It's mainly the elderly, disabled and the disadvantaged that are targeted. And it would be encouraging to get more people to report them and to explain the 14-day cooling off period. Some people think, I've signed up, that's me. It's interesting to know about that. I only found out about that a few months ago. It's not just financial loss, there's emotional scars as well after it. People feel, I was that foolish there, that's stupid, I'm just a silly old whatever. So it affects them in more ways than just financial loss. So it's good to know the council are active on that and they are doing a lot of work, and I hope it continues and progresses, because scams are a scourge as far as I'm concerned in society. So listen to me and back to the forum. Any of the forum would like to come in there with anything?
We have Councillor Loudon, Chair.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth Ann. Go ahead, Katie.
Thanks very much, Bert. It was just to pass on my thanks to all of the team who've been working particularly hard during the pandemic. I think it was extremely depressing, if not surprising, that there were a number of sort of COVID-related scams about, whether it was we'll get in touch for a vaccine appointment or about the £500 staff bonus or whatever it was. There was quite a few of them that were floating around, and I thought that in terms of our social media and information going out to councillors, there was some really good advice on that as well, making sure that those were flagged up to us as quickly as possible so that we could get the message out. So just thank you for that and for everything else that the team's been doing.
Thanks very much there. Is there anybody else with a hand up there?
No further hands, Chair.
No further hands. Right, that's good to say. Thank you very much, Lisa, for that. And keep up the good work. Thank you. I've no urgent business, so I think we'll be bringing the meeting to an end. It's a very encouraging meeting. There's plenty of comments and observations. And of course, with a bit more time to get more in, we can certainly bring things back at a later date. I'd like to say a special thanks to Elizabeth Ann for taking my hand through the meeting as usual. Thank you, Elizabeth Ann. And thanks very much, colleagues, for attending today. Thank you.